Priya, stay close. I want to bring in Jim Bianco of Bianco Research as well. Jim, I get two questions a lot, particularly over the last couple of weeks. This 50 basis point hike story is number one. Number two is whether they make a decision, another one, to accelerate the taper and just wrap this thing up. What are your thoughts going into this one?
I don't think 50 basis points, assuming we're talking about the March meeting, is likely. The accelerated taper, I could definitely see that, because what we've been doing is dancing around the big issue. And the big issue is President Biden's press conference last week. He acknowledged that inflation was a problem, and he said, quote, "This is what we're going to do about it. The Federal Reserve will fix it," essentially, is what he said after that in the next sentence. So Jay Powell's audience, I know this is Bloomberg and we're talking to Wall Street and we think that our audience is Wall Street. His audience is also the White House. They have high expectations. He is going to bring down inflation, bring it down fast. They said he would do it. They said he agrees with him. And he's got till the midterm elections to do it. And that's why I think you see this disconnect on Wall Street between 4 rate hikes, $1 trillion of a balance sheet runoff, and most of the prognosticators saying the Fed won't go that far. What if inflation winds up coming down faster? I think Jay's worried more about what happens politically to the Fed if they don't move fast and hard to get in front of this issue.
Okay, Jim, this is actually deeply controversial and yet really hits on a real hot spot right now. How politically motivated is this Fed chair versus others, especially among all of the conflicting messages last year with respect to press conferences and how some of the meeting minutes were portrayed afterwards?
Well, this Fed chair has got something that not even Donald Trump did, and that is that he had the president of the United States order him last week to deal with inflation because it's hurting his party in the midterm elections. So stop right there. This is probably the most political we've ever seen the Federal Reserve get themselves wrapped up into. And this is not going to go away anytime soon. The next couple of months of inflation numbers are not going to get better. Now, maybe in the later spring into the early summer, we might see some kind of a peak in the numbers. But for the next 30 to 90 days, they're not going to get better. And the president has given him his marching orders. And I think if he comes out and tries to backpedal on those marching orders, Wall Street might like it. But he's got this other constituency in the Democratic Party that might not.
Okay. So, Priya, do you agree with that assessment?
No, I think Chair Powell started the pivot in the December meeting. I was actually surprised the market didn't react more hawkishly, because remember, they were, between the September dot plot and the December dot plot, there'd been a big shift in terms of Team Transitory really giving up. So I think they did start the pivot. What was interesting about that press conference was, even the president here is saying that, well, there is an inflation problem. So even if growth slows down, which we do expect Omicron to have an impact, it's not going to derail the Fed from continuing to tighten. What I think the market's looking for is, what's that threshold? They talk about sooner or faster. Is that threshold 2% PCE? Is it 3% PCE? And I hope he's asked that how much tolerance do they have? Because of all the heightened focus, even from the president, on inflation, is that tolerance band actually not that wide, which will mean that if inflation doesn't decelerate quickly, or if wage inflation stays high, they may have to pivot to sooner or faster. And I think the market's not going to like that.
Jim Bianco, as we go into this meeting and you give it the historic import that it deserves, is this a chairman who can call the shot? I'm confused by this, folks. Is this a chairman a la Greenspan who calls a shot, or is there another process that you glean?
I would lean on that there's another process that I would glean. Look, we've got a situation in the economy that we haven't seen for 40 years. We haven't seen since Carl Yastrzemski was playing for the Boston Red Sox.
There we go.
And that is we've got inflation. Yeah, I know when you were a child, Tom. We've got inflation, and that is a problem as we move forward from here. And that as we go forward, the playbook might look more like the 60s and 70s than it does over the last 20 years or so. And that I think people have been so focused on what the playbook has looked like, especially since 2008, they forgot that in an inflationary environment, it changes quite a bit.
So what's the method today for Chairman Powell to be Big Pappy? What's he got to say to get the Ortiz glow?
He's got to say that he's serious about inflation, and he's got to say that If that requires more financial tightening, which is code word for volatile markets, so be it.
Okay, so how do you fold oil into that? But, Jim, this is important. Chicago has some of the highest gasoline prices. You're going to have $5 a gallon for you to put in the H2, Jim Bianco. What does the chairman say today about what President Biden cares about, which is $5 a gallon gas?
I think he's going to try and make the case. Well, he can't do anything about gas because he's not the energy secretary, if you want to put it in those terms. But he's going to have to make a strong message that inflation is a very serious issue because it is for the president, and he's been told by the president that it's a serious issue for the Federal Reserve as well, too.
That's why this news conference in 34 minutes could be fascinating. That's one view from Jim Bianco. Priya, I know of some people who still believe that this Fed chair believes in the essence of transitory, even though he's trashed the word. What do you make of that?
I think that's right. I don't think they're going to use that word. But if you look at their projections, they have inflation slowing. Our economists have inflation slowing as well. The question is, what happens to wage inflation? How quickly does it slow? How much of a threshold does the Fed have to look through inflation? So I do think that they believe inflation is likely to slow, which can allow them to go start gradually. And if it doesn't slow, I think they can absolutely accelerate. They can accelerate QT. They can accelerate the pace of hikes. But why tell the market now? I think that would really add a lot more volatility because maybe inflation does decelerate in the second half, which is why I think the message today is we're going to tighten. We can be gradual. We can be measured in our steps. And yes, if the risk scenario emerges, we will be ready to be humble and nimble at that point. I think too much of that humility or nimbility, if that's a word, being nimble right now, I think that's going to add a lot more vol to the market.
You're allowed to make up words when it comes to the Fed.
Yeah, it's surveillance, Priya. You can make it up.
We make up stuff all the time. Jim, just quickly to you, sir. In 2 minutes, we get the decision. 30 minutes after that, the news conference. If you had a question for Chairman Powell today, what would it be?
It would be about inflation and why he missed last year. And to be fair, everybody did. And does he have any confidence going forward in where he thinks inflation is going to go in 22 and in 23? Because that's going to be a big issue as far as whether or not they can be nimble, they can be gradual, or they have to be aggressive. And he's also got two audiences he's got to look at. Wall Street's one audience, and the White House is another audience right now. So does he have confidence in his outlook for inflation as he moves forward?
Jim Bianco of Bianco Research and Priya Misra of TD, to both of you. And to Michael Gapin in the office over at Barclays, thank you for watching, sir. The chief economist over there. Can we stop talking?